Today's cases deal with two women, one called Theresa Knorr and the other called Blair. These women both killed two of their children with horrific acts of torture that went on for months and months and months before the deaths. Theresa Cross burned one of her daughters alive. She starved the other daughter to death and got her own children to help her dispose of the bodies. Blair was so callous and so cold, she took pleasure in torturing her children. She callously dumped their bodies into a chest freezer that she was still using to store food, I might add, and just left the bodies there when she got an eviction notice and just left the freezer and went on about her business. I mean, these women are beyond evil, almost. They exploited the societal image of mothers to get away with torture and murder. Mothers are sanctified in our society, and a high value is placed on virtuous women who put their children first, and there is an image of mothers being these kind of Madonna-like figures that are virtuous women. They put their children first, they put their families first, and this image is so prevalent and so pervasive that it allows women who abuse their children to get away with their crimes longer. Now, the women, as I said, who appear in today's episode, they got away with their callous brutality for years by exploiting this virtuous image of motherhood. They tortured with extreme cruelty their own flesh and blood. What at first appears to be unfathomable is in fact very simple. They did it because it makes them feel good. They do it because they can. They do it so they feel powerful and they feel in control. They did it because they could. If it takes a village to raise a child, it also takes a village to save one. You know, corrupt, lazy social workers, teachers who turn a blind eye, the busy 9-to-5ers who look away from a child being smacked and screamed at in the supermarket, people who see a child being dragged up the road and don't report it, you know, social workers and teachers who see bruises on children, children that are constantly hungry, children that don't want to go home and they don't report it and they turn a blind eye. We're always being told in our society, mind your own business, it's nothing to do with us. You know, if it's your neighbours, you know, you can hear the children screaming at 2-3 o'clock in the morning and then you see them with bruises and turn a blind eye. Let me make something clear. If you in any way suspect abuse and you don't report it, you are also part of that abuse. All of us raise children, even if the kids are nothing to do with you, even if they're strangers. If you suspect abuse, you must report it. It's better to stick your nose in than it is to let a child be punished for something that they haven't done. All of us are responsible for children's safety. The 4 lives that were lost at the hands of these two callous and brutal women could have been saved if just more people stuck their nose in. When it comes to children's safety, there is no such thing as minding your own business. So with that, let's get into the first case. The first case is of a woman called Theresa Cross Knorr, who was born in Sacramento, California. She had 6 children, by different fathers, and she was a single mother bringing her children up on her own. Now, there are very, very early reports going back to her firstborn Howard that she abused her children. Apparently, her children had bed sores because she would leave them in bed all the time. They weren't allowed to get out of the playpen. She would put them in a playpen, and for 24 hours, that's where they would stay. Her daughter Sheila, when she was just a few months old, had bed sores because she was never allowed to get out of bed. She was a very, very controlling woman, always. But let's go back to the beginning. So we've got a woman called Theresa Knorr who brutally tortured and killed two of her daughters. Theresa Knorr was born in Sacramento, California on March the 14th, 1946. She was very, very close, apparently, to her mother, but very, very distant from her father. She had one sister, Rosemary. Rosemary actually grew up to be very, very successful, but unfortunately she was later murdered by her husband. There's a lot of evidence. He was never convicted, but there was a lot of evidence. We'll get to that in a bit. Anyway, Theresa Knorr was born in Sacramento, California, and she absolutely idolized her mother. Her and her mother were really, really, really close. And apparently when Theresa was about 13 or 14, her mother just died of a heart attack right in front of her, just literally collapsed, instantly killed. And her father had then developed Parkinson's disease. He was not able to look after the girls, so her and her sister basically brought themselves up. And Theresa was always apparently promiscuous. She drank a lot. She was very controlling. She actually showed a lot of symptoms of borderline personality disorder, and she married at the age of 16 to a man called Clifford Sanders. He was 5 years older than her. She basically targeted him. He couldn't get away from her, and everything he did, she controlled. She wouldn't let him have any lunch money in case he met women. He had to wear basically rags so that he wouldn't look attractive. She followed him to work. She followed him from work. If he waved at a woman, he would get punished for that. If a woman spoke to him, even if he didn't say anything to her, he got punished for that. She was very, very controlling. Anything that he did that she perceived as stepping out of line, she would punish him. She would throw things at him. She would beat him. She would burn him with cigarettes. She constantly threatened to shoot him. Theresa Knorr was the original nightmare wife. She was just terrible, terrible to live with. On July the 6th, 1964, her and Clifford Sanders were having an argument. He said that he couldn't take the control anymore. He was leaving her. She picked up a shotgun rifle. Now this is important because in the court it said that it was a rifle that could not go off by accident. Remember that. She would have to pick it up, cock the hammer, take the safety off, ratchet the gun, and then fire it. So she had 4 chances to stop. And she shot him. She shot him to death, and then she ran to a neighbour saying, "I think my husband's been shot in the hand. The gun went off by accident." The neighbour goes there. Obviously he's dead. The police get called. Now at the time, Theresa Knorr was a single mother to a toddler, Howard, and she was pregnant with her second child. She testified in court that the gun went off by accident and that Clifford Sanders had been abusing her. She said that he'd raped her, he'd beaten her up, he'd abused her, yada yada yada. Now there were loads of witnesses for the prosecution saying that no, Theresa beat him up, Theresa was abusing him. There's no way the gun could have gone off by accident. She would have to pick it up, she would have to take the rifle off, all this. But because she was pregnant with her second child, Sheila, she was heavily pregnant. She gave off, she was very young, she was only 16 or 17, and she gave off an image of innocence. And as I was saying in the intro, lazy and corrupt bureaucracy does have a hand in letting evil people do what they want. They had a chance here to pull her back, and basically they let her go. She gave such a good performance that members of the jury actually hugged her and cried. They felt bad for her. Her toddler Howard, when she was arrested for shooting her husband, a nice couple that she knew had taken Howard in, and they said that he had been tied to his playpen, he had bed sores, he had bruises on him, and they said he looked like an Auschwitz survivor. He was so thin, like it was obvious he'd never been fed. When his mother left prison, Howard did not want to go back to his mother. He actually clung to his foster carers, screaming. And because Theresa was pregnant, she really took advantage of these people. Like she would do nothing around the house. She borrowed thousands of dollars that she didn't pay back. She said to this couple that she was determined as much as she could to favour one child and hurt the other one. And actually, from the moment of Sheila's birth, Theresa Knorr seems to have blamed her daughter, who hadn't even been born yet, for all the drama with Clifford Sanders. She seems to have focused all her hatred and rage on the embryo in her womb, and from the moment of Sheila's birth, her life was a living hell. After Sheila's birth, Theresa began drinking heavily. Throughout her life, Theresa would have periods of heavy drinking followed by abstinence, but the drinking seemed to bring out all her personality disorder and hatred towards her children. She then married a man called Robert Knorr. No, was it? Robert Knorr. She married a man called Robert Knorr, who was a US Marine. She had 3 more children by him. She had her daughter Susan, William Robert Knorr, and Robert Wallace Knorr. So there's 5 children. Her last child, Terry, Theresa named after herself, would be born towards the end of the marriage. Now, in the second marriage, it followed the exact same pattern. She was controlling, she was abusive. From the moment of her children's birth, every single child, that life was hell. But Sheila and Susan took the brunt of Theresa's wrath. From the moment of Sheila's birth, her life literally was a living hell. She was beaten. She had to do all of the housework, and when I say housework, she made her scrub the floors with a toothbrush and ammonia. Every single square inch of the floor would have to be scrubbed with boiling water and ammonia, then polished, then waxed, and then scrubbed again. If there was a speck of dust anywhere, she would mercilessly beat the children. I mean, she expected to have a hospital standard of cleanliness for her home, but she wasn't prepared to do any of the work. And Sheila and Susan were just turned into slaves. I mean, the way she treated these children was just horrific. She beat them all the time, all the children. She burnt them. She threw knives at them. She would throw boiling water at them. She would burn them with cigarettes. She would threaten to stab them. She shot one of them. Their lives were a living hell, and they were brought up under her discipline, and they were brought up using fear. Fear for a child is a very you never recover from it. You never recover. If you're terrified of one or both parents, that kind of fear haunts you for the rest of your life. William Knorr, her eldest son, himself has said, there is no child that Theresa Knorr has brought into the world that isn't broken or dead. And that sums up Theresa Knorr exactly. The first child to die from Theresa Knorr's sadistic, callous abuse was her daughter Susan. In 1982, Theresa Knorr became convinced, apparently, that her daughter Susan was a witch. I don't believe this. I don't believe that she actually believed that. I think that she tortured her children because it made her feel good. She did it because she could. It's as simple as that. When you get these really evil cases, it can seem unfathomable, but the bottom line is they do it because they want to, because it makes them feel good, and they create excuses for the abuse. And that's what happened here. She basically started saying to the children that Susan was a witch, that she was putting spells on her to make her gain weight, because when you're middle-aged you do put weight on. I mean, I'm nearly 40, I've got a little bit of spread, that happens. But Theresa blamed her children for everything. She blamed anything that went wrong, she blamed her children for. And because she was gaining weight and she couldn't lose weight, she targeted Susan for her wrath. She shot her with a .44 caliber revolver. There's actually a story in the Knorr family that it might have been the youngest girl, Terry, who would have been about 5 or 6 at the time. Apparently the little girl had been given the gun and was told to hold her sister there, like, don't let your sister move, and the gun went off by accident. Be that as it may, Theresa Knorr immediately switched from evil abuser to competent nurse. Theresa Knorr had made sporadic efforts to work as a convalescent nurse, and she would steal the drugs, she would steal the bandages, she would steal all like the restraints and gauze and everything else. So with all the stuff that she'd stolen from her work, she immediately turned into the nurse, switched her personality like that, wrestled her daughter into the bath, handcuffed her to the bath taps and gave her antibiotics, treated the wound, stitched the wound, everything else, but the bullet was still in her back. Apparently, when the gun went off, the bullet travelled through her chest and went out towards the back, and you could feel the lump on the back. Anyway, so she's in the bath, she's handcuffed to the bath, and she's there for a month. Theresa treats her and the wound heals. Susan eventually recovered, but as I said, she had a lump in her back. Now, around this time, Theresa had started to force Susan to be a prostitute, because, as I said, she wasn't working. She would always get fired for stealing from her jobs and this and that. So she was on welfare, she didn't have a lot of money, and so she forced her oldest daughter to be a prostitute. In fact, she forced both of her daughters, Susan and Sheila, to prostitute themselves to bring money into the house, and they were not rewarded for this. They were not thanked for this. Instead of thanking her daughters for having sex with a stranger so that she could pay bills and eat, she actually punished her daughters for doing this and savagely attacked them every time they did it, even though they had no choice. And in one of these arguments, she stabbed Susan in the back with a pair of scissors. She chained her to the dining room table, underneath the dining room table, and made her stay there for months and months and months on end. Susan, not surprisingly, wanted to get out of the house and begged her mother. She would beg and plead, please let me go. I will do anything you want, please let me go. So Theresa said, okay, I will let you go if you let me take the bullet out of your back. So Susan, in her desperation to leave the house, agreed to, she would have been about 19 or 20 at this point. She had lived all her life under Theresa's thumb. She was desperate to get away, and she said, okay, I will let you take the bullet out of my back. Theresa got her children to hold her oldest daughter down, washed her back with, first of all, she made her take Meloril, which is to make her drowsy, and she washed it down with some Southern Comfort. She had a half bottle of Southern Comfort, made her drink the Southern Comfort. This was the anaesthesia, okay, and she used the rest of the Southern Comfort to wash her back to sterilise it. So she washed her back in the rest of the Southern Comfort, and she got an X-Acto knife and cut through the muscle and tissues of the back, and with her bare hands pulled out the bullet and then stitched it up with some butterfly stitches. Now, not surprisingly, that wound became infected. She was very, very groggy before surgery, and she never came out of that grogginess. As the infection set in, she became delirious. She was seeing things that weren't there. She was speaking to people that weren't there. She lost all control of her bladder and her bowels and had to wear diapers, nappies. So Theresa again had stolen all this stuff from her jobs as a nurse. So she had some like adult diapers, some like adult nappies that she used to put on Susan. Now, even though Susan was suffering in this way, Theresa had still chained her to the bottom of the dining room table, and basically she got sick of changing her diapers. That was it. She got sick of changing her diapers. So she got her oldest two boys and said, right, we're going for a drive. We're going for a ride in the car. And this is what she did. I mean, it's just so evil. She put her daughter in the trunk of the car, in the boot of the car, drove them up to the mountains, got her daughter out, put her on a pile of her stuff, sleeping bags, teddies, bits and pieces, clothes, put the daughter on top, poured gasoline all over her daughter. Her daughter's still alive, like she's not even dead yet. She says to the boy, Robert, light a match, drop it and get into the car, quick. So they light the match, drops it, they get into the car. Susan's body was found. It was registered as a Jane Doe in Placer County, California, and the mystery of her death would not be solved until 5 years later. Now, following Susan's death, Theresa Knorr began targeting the next one in the chain, which was Sheila. Sheila, from the moment of her birth, had been a Cinderella. She was literally a slave. She had to work 18 hours a day cleaning the house, cleaning the walls, the trim, the floor. She made her clean it with toothbrushes. She was burnt, she was whipped, she was starved. I mean, her entire life had just been a litany of slavery and just terrible, terrible abuse. In May of 1985, Theresa Knorr forced Sheila into prostitution exactly the same way she'd forced Susan. Made her be a prostitute, took all her money off of her, and used this as a reason to target her for abuse, not to thank her for having sex with a strange man so that the family could live, but forcing her to be a prostitute and then punishing her for it afterwards. So, in May of 1985, Theresa Knorr began saying that she had caught a venereal disease from Sheila because she'd used the same toilet seat. She accused her of infecting her, and she also accused her of being pregnant. So Theresa beat her, beat her almost to death, hog-tied her. Now Sheila was very small, she was a very petite girl. And at this time, Theresa Knorr was huge, like she weighed almost 300 pounds. I mean, she could not fight back. Theresa Knorr hog-tied her and shoved her into a 2x2 closet. It would have been about this big, and left her there for 2 weeks to starve to death. Just before she died, her body went into what they call a cadaveric spasm, where the body jerks just before death, and it hit one of the shelves, like the shelves fell down and cut her neck and cut her chest. When Theresa Knorr heard the noise, she left it for 8 hours and then opened the cupboard. When she opened the cupboard, the closet, the naked nude body of her daughter fell out onto the floor. Well, most of it did. Some of her flesh was actually stuck to the bottom of the closet. Again, she called her 2 oldest sons. She got a big moving box and she said to her sons, put the body in here. And she put a pillowcase underneath the body and pushed the body in and then taped the box up. They then took the body out into the woods and disposed of her in that box. She was listed as Jane Doe 660785. Just 1 year later, after the body of her sister, also listed as a Jane Doe, had been found in Placer County. So the police had 2 bodies of 2 unidentified girls found 1 year apart. They never knew that these girls were related or what happened to them until several years later. Even though Sheila's body had been removed, the smell of decomposition and her flesh was still in that apartment. So Theresa, to try and claim the insurance, set the apartment on fire with the help of her youngest daughter, Terry. Now, Terry could see which way the wind was blowing, because her mother now started to focus her abuse on her. Terry had seen 2 of her sisters be killed, and she thought, no, I'm out, I'm not staying here. She thought, fuck this, I'm going. So she left, but for years, Terry was haunted by what had happened to her sisters. You know, because of that, she got into drugs, you know, she was traumatised, she was suffering classic PTSD. On October the 28th, 1993, Terry Knorr was watching the TV, America's Most Wanted, drinking vodka and crying. She called America's Most Wanted and reported everything that had happened, and she was put in touch with a detective, John Fitzgerald, from Placer County, California. Now, Detective John Fitzgerald listened to Terry's statement, and he knew instantly that he had the identity of his 2 Jane Does that had not been identified. On November the 15th, 1993, Theresa Knorr was hunted down. She had been living in somebody's home under an alias, under a different name, as a live-in nurse. She was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and special circumstances torture. So she was charged with the torture of her children. She initially pleaded not guilty, but then made a deal with the prosecution after learning that her son Robert had agreed to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. On October the 17th, 1995, Theresa Knorr was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. She is now incarcerated at the California Institute for Women in Chino, California. She will actually be eligible for parole in 2027. William Knorr and Robert Knorr were sentenced to probation for helping their mother dispose of the bodies. Although they had been involved in her deaths, they were not guilty in the same way that Theresa was. They were also victims of abuse. So Theresa Knorr is now serving 2 consecutive life sentences in Chino, California. She is exactly where she needs to be. Theresa Knorr exploited the lazy bureaucracy of the city where she lived. She exploited the laziness of the teachers, and she exploited the societal image of the virtuous mother. And she got away with her crimes for years and years and years. Just like our next mother, Michelle Blair. Michelle Blair also exploited the laziness and indifference of the children's services and the image of the mother that people expect. Let's talk about our next case. The evil, the callous, the cold as ice, Michelle Blair. In 2015, 35-year-old single mum Michelle Blair was living on the east side of Detroit with her 4 children. Her children, Stoney and Stephen, were the ones who lost their lives to this callous, evil woman. She was evicted for not paying rent, and she left that home, and when they came to clean the home out, they found a chest freezer that she had been using to store food in that had the bodies of her children, Stoney and Stephen, in that freezer. Both of those children had died from blunt force trauma, but both of them showed signs and symptoms of serious abuse. 35-year-old Michelle Blair had never worked. She'd always lived on welfare. She was known to have a volatile temper. In interviews and statements that she's made since, she has shown absolutely no remorse for the abuse of her children. She abused them because it made her feel good. It made her feel powerful. It made her feel in control. This is the horrific story of Michelle Blair. Inside the chest freezer was found the body of a teenage girl and a body of a young boy just right underneath it. Now, Michelle Blair was arrested. A neighbour disclosed her whereabouts, and the police found her at a neighbour's house with her other 2 children. Her other 2 children testified that Michelle Blair had always abused them. The bodies of Stoney Blair, who was 13, and Stephen, who was 9, were the ones found in the freezer. Michelle Blair absolutely tortured these children. She put cigarettes out on the children. She put boiling water on them. She used to put bags over their heads and choke them and suffocate them to the point of unconsciousness, and then release the bag and then do it again. And she would do this for hours and hours and hours on end. The abuse and torture that she put these children through is absolutely unbelievable, and she was known to children's services. This is what I'm saying about lazy social workers teachers who turn a blind eye. Like, certainly these children were covered in bruises all day, every day, and they went to school like that. They were absent from school for months and months and months, and nobody chased it up. Nobody knew about Stoney and Stephen until their bodies were found in that freezer, and they had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to save these children. Michelle Blair confessed to the murders at the Wayne County Circuit Court. There is video of her confessing to the murders. Now, as with Theresa Knorr, she made up an excuse of why she needed to abuse her children. She said that they were sexually assaulting one another and yada yada yada. It's just another excuse. There is no reason for this torture other than Michelle Blair wanted to do it and it made her feel good. That's all there is to it. She choked them with bags, she made them drink bleach and Windex, she burned them with cigarettes, she burned them with boiling water, she starved them, she tortured them. They succumbed to blunt force trauma, starvation, dehydration. That's what killed them, and she actually put their bodies in the freezer and continued to store food in there. The other two children must have been absolutely terrified. I mean, now they're in foster care, but God knows what kind of PTSD and everything that they're going to have to deal with, because their mother is evil. She has shown no remorse whatsoever for abusing her children like this. She said that she did not feel any remorse because of what the children had done. Basically, the kids made her do it. Now, to me, Michelle Blair and Theresa Knorr and any other woman like that, they take advantage of the image of the virtuous mother. They take advantage of people who mind their own business. When it comes to children's safety, there is no such thing as minding your own business. If ever you are suspicious that there's abuse going on, report it. It's better to be nosy than to let a child suffer. This is Filthy Ketchup. Whatever you do today, please make good choices, and thank you for tuning in with me today.